think it's upsetting to be tricked in general. And when it comes to friends and family, to kind of like start speaking to someone as if, oh, hey, what's going on? And then like, even if it happened really fast over the course of 30 seconds of sort of realizing that you feel like an idiot because you've just been talking to no one. And it's just the idea of being fooled in some cases. But then in other cases, like I had another friend who just said in the moment, just said like, I feel so lonely because fundamentally when you realize it, you realize you're just talking to yourself. Like you're just talking to no one. Hi, I'm Evan Ratliff. I cover technology, crime, and identity, where those three things intersect. I write for Wired Magazine and Bloomberg Business Week, among other magazines. I have a podcast called Shell Game. I also wrote a book called The Mastermind about a criminal cartel. And today, looking forward to talking about how AI is infiltrating our identity.
So, Evan, I have had the pleasure of listening to the podcast, The Shell Game, and read a lot of your stuff in general. Would you mind, in your word, kind of like explain what the Shell Game is? And then I will pebble you with questions after that.
Sure. So Shell Game is a 6-part podcast. It is an immersive journalistic experiment into how it will feel when more and more of the voices around us are artificial intelligence or otherwise fake. And the kind of premise of the show was that I started messing around with voice cloning and trying to figure out sort of like what it meant for me as someone who does a fair amount of podcasting in addition to my writing and other journalism. And then I had the idea of hooking it up to a chatbot and then hooking that combination up to my phone or a phone line, eventually my own phone line, in the form of what everyone now knows as a voice agent. And then setting that voice agent loose in the world as me, including for work purposes to do interviews and things like that, including dealing with customer service, dealing with scammers. So I set up a specific line to attract scammers and telemarketers, and then I had it
That's great.
Answer those calls. And then eventually also my friends and family. So it was, this voice agent was attached to my mobile number. So I could call someone, or it could call someone on my behalf. They would think it was me, and they would actually get the voice agent with my voice, but powered usually by ChatGPT. Sometimes I would use another model. And so I did that for about 5-6 months. And then it's kind of the story of each of the ways I deployed it and how people responded.
It is very cool. If anybody haven't heard it, they should go to hear it. And also, you did like I think I saw her on NPR did like a 1-episode version of the whole thing together with you.
Yes, Radiolab did an episode that was based out of, it was basically kind of like a merging of 2 episodes of the show onto 1 episode of Radiolab.
Okay, many questions, but let's start with, I guess it's 6 months ago, something like that you did, and maybe even a little bit longer.
It started coming out actually, it's been almost a year. It came out starting in July and it went through August. The last episodes aired in August.
And so if you were doing it again, what do you think would be the biggest difference now from when you did it back then?
The biggest difference now is latency. That's the number one difference. So latency being the time that it takes to respond, for the chatbot to formulate a response, and then for that response to get translated into voice and respond on the phone. That was the biggest giveaway for the agent when it talked to people, was it just took a little too long to respond. It's still, a lot of people did not recognize that they were talking to AI and not talking to a human, but most of the time that it gave it away, that was the main reason. And actually, I just used it on stage at an event in Portland last week. And it's significantly better than the last time that I used it. And I'm using the same services I was using before. They've just tweaked it to be a little bit better. It still has some cadence problems. It still has a lot of problems, and you can still detect that it is AI, but the technology has advanced as I expected it probably would.
Before we dive into what you learned, which I'm really eager to hear about, I'm an idea guy. I spend a lot of time thinking about where do ideas come from? Can you talk for a second about what inspired this whole experiment?
Yeah, I mean, I had been interested in voice cloning for a while. I think anyone who does any kind of audio, you know, it comes up. Like there's this company called Descript that has a podcast editing software, and I worked with one company that was using it, and it's you sort of notice in there that they have this thing where they could clone your voice. I mean, they've had it for a couple of years actually. They could clone your voice, and they could use that to fill in, instead of doing what we call pickups, where you have to go back and re-record something. They could use that voice to maybe like add a line somewhere. And the company I was working with did not actually use it for that purpose, but it did get me interested in voice cloning.
That's what we do in this podcast. We will actually not use any of your stuff except for what we just recorded.
It's just
Perfect.
a voice sample, and then we just get you to say whatever we want. It's great. It's great.
I mean, that's not that far off. There have got to be people. I mean, we could talk about this later. Like my main interest is in like crime and scamming. So like there have to be people already running a similar type of podcast related scam. But in any case, I was interested in it, but then I was also, I don't know, by the fall of 2024, I was sick of hearing about AI. Like I thought, I don't want to cover it. I don't want anything to do with it. I was covering other things. And I had this moment. I mean, it wasn't like anything prompted this moment, but I kind of realized like, oh, is this just being old? Like I used to be a person who I embraced every new technology. Like when Vine started, like I got on Vine, like I would do, because I'm both for my job, because I write about tech a lot, but also just like I was a person who was interested in the future. And I worked at Wired Magazine. And I was like, actually, am I becoming a person who just like refuses to address the new thing? So I thought, you know what? Voice is going to be the thing. I'm going to clone my voice. I'm going to pro-clone my voice and see what it's like. And then once I did that, I started leaving people voicemails, like just calling up and like playing a voicemail, into their voicemail and like fooling them with it a few times. And I was like, well, that's fun. But then I thought, what if I could just call with this thing and hook it up to ChatGPT? And at the time, there was like a plugin you could use that could sort of made this possible. And that got my sort of old like tinkering senses going. And I was like, oh, I can. And I spent weeks making this thing so I could make phone calls with it. And I started calling my wife with it. And some of that is in the show, like my very early efforts. And I was so proud of myself for building this voice agent. And then I discovered that there were like 5 companies that they had platforms where you could just do this. You just sign up, you put in you just attach it by API to like 11 labs where you clone your voice, and they just did it all. So the show is actually, after the first bit, it's all using these platforms, which are much, much better than the system that they shut down the plugin because there was no point in having it anymore.
What was some of the things that you didn't get to do, but you think you could do now?
Well, I don't want to give them away because I am doing them now. We're working on season 2.
Well, let's go back to be a little bit concrete then. So I've cloned my voice, of course. Also, I made the Henrik GPT. You can ask a question, it looks at all the stuff I've written, and then it asks my thing. I think we had Guy Kawasaki on that also have done this, and basically thinks that he's the better version of Guy Kawasaki because they can actually remember all his stuff that he's ever done, and so he's like, you should just talk to this. Just like a little, like any tips on the cloning? Because I've tried both the professional one with 11 labs and I've done like the one where you just upload 30 seconds. And obviously it's quite like hit and miss a little bit, like how it will clone it. Any kind of pro tips on cloning?
Well, the biggest pro tip, and I actually got this when I interviewed the guy who started this company, Vappy, who's one of the platforms that I use to do the calling, is that you got to think about what you want to use it for. So if you actually want to clone, mine is a professional grade clone using, I have many, 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 many hours of tape of me speaking into a microphone like this one, a professional microphone, professionally recorded, much of it in a studio. And so it sounds very good, but it actually almost sounds too good for phone calls in some ways. And so if what you want to do is, this is kind of a special case, but like what I wanted to do.
Well, you want to scam your family.
If you want to call people with it and it sound like you're on the phone, the thing to do, and I actually did this and did a separate clone, which I didn't use in the show because we had already started using one of them and it was like, it would be too strange, jarring to hear both of them, was just like call something and have it record for like a half an hour just through your phone. So the sound is actually not that great, but the sound of the phone's not that great. And so it's really about like the purpose that you want to use it for. But I mean, the main tip is what I'm sure 11 Labs probably says this now, is like the better the microphone and the quiet environment and the consistency of it. Because when mine messes up too, I can tell that there are some recordings that I gave it that are probably a little more hollow. It was probably in a room that wasn't that great. And it will kind of like, I don't know if it averages or what it does, but you will hear sometimes like a slight change in kind of like the room tone of the voice.
But I think actually that's a super tip. I don't think even 11 Labs had it. I did it recently again, and I don't think they do like make the tone like what are you going to use it for? Like even like if you're going to do a professional like a presentation, you're going to have one tonality, and if you're going to just call your friends and saying, "Hey, what's up?" then obviously you use different words, different tonality, different kind of like modulation in your voice.
Yep.
Well, now, so one thing that's making me think as I listen to y'all kind of, geek out on the audio for an everyday person, what have you discovered are the applications? Because I think a lot of people listen, they kind of go similar. We had an artist who's won a pretty prestigious art award, but a lot of people go, "Hey, I'm not making paintings. I'm not a photographer." And I think a lot of people could be tempted to check out and go, "I'm not creating voice recordings myself," right? What have you discovered are some of the practical applications that somebody off the street or, just kind of a typical retail customer, you go, "Hang on, before you dismiss this, think about using this tech in this way."
Yeah, I have those. I will preface this by saying, I mean, I would say like I myself am a skeptic of how this is used. I mean, I'm a skeptic of everything. I'm a journalist. So like my default approach is sort of interest in something, but also like, where is this going to go wrong? And so what I was trying to get people to think about was not using it themselves. It was that you are going to encounter this in the world more and more, and
Yeah.
you need to be ready for it. So with that preface, I do think that even people who are very skeptical of it don't think about some of the uses. The very obvious one is there are people who have lost their voice for medical reasons in all variety of ways who can use these types of voice agents to absolutely transform their lives. So like that's the baseline. There are people who don't have a voice who can use this to have a voice. So we should think about that. I think then there's the question of kind of deploying it for practical purposes. And, there's a wide range of things and feelings about this. So for instance, after the show came out, I had people ask me, well, what about using it? Could I set one up to like speak to my, mother or father, grandfather, grandmother who is in memory care and basically like can't remember when I contact them, but it's nice for someone to check in with them every day. And I feel like they should have this communication and they could communicate with this AI. There's even now, I think there's a company that maybe does this. Now, some people are just absolutely disgusted by this idea. They think that it's actually inhumane and horrific that you would stick a chatbot on your mom or dad or grandmother. And other people, I think, are like, well, if you've ever dealt with this situation and how difficult it is, like, I'm open to it. Like, I'm open to anything that makes them feel better. And so again, like, I tend to be skeptical of it and think like, well, I wouldn't do that. But, people are going to have a wide range of views of what's appropriate and what's ethical. Similarly to another idea that a lot of people are into, and I do get into this in the show, is sort of creating a voice agent of a loved one or of yourself so that when you are dead, other people can talk to it or you can talk to a loved one who is now gone. So feeding it a lot of information, giving it the voice. I don't want to spoil the show, but like ultimately I conclude like that's not for me. That's not something I would want to do, even though I have a member of my family that actually would actively want to do that in some ways. So I think those are the different uses. And then there's this sort of like everyday stuff that AI companies sell. And that's where I'm the most skeptical of it. Like, I don't know, creating agents. I think it's telling that whenever they talk about creating agents, the example they almost always use is getting restaurant reservations. And like, the number of people that even in America get restaurant reservations, much less the number, and then any of the people who get restaurant reservations and then can't use any of the available services, like, oh, it's too hard to use Resi or Open Table. Like, I do get restaurant reservations. And so they're like, you can create an agent that will call 200 restaurants and get the best reservation. It's like, that is a solution looking for a problem
Well, it's hard. I
in the
would
most extreme
say,
way.
it's hard to know what good niche versus bad niche is, right? So Uber, started as a black car service. You go, actually, not a lot of people want a black car. Well, when you realize it worked, which is to say it's really difficult to know kind of which edges of the possibility space are relevant or irrelevant. I love the example of somebody who lost their voice. We had Josh Tu, who runs Meta's Orion project. So he's working on that product. And he said that one of the lead users that they're getting a lot of inspiration and getting a lot of great feedback are folks who've lost their sight, right? Folks who've lost their voice. So I think there's kind of this augmentation of a lost human ability that makes a lot of sense to me. All the other stuff, I don't know if it's a good niche or a bad niche.
So you don't have anything that you kept in operation where it just was so much more convenient to deploy the agent that you were like, you know what, I'm just gonna keep having them do that.
No, I think that that's a little bit particular to voice. Like, I know, some of these sort of like power users of AI who like automate the writing of their email and all this stuff, but I think when it's voice, how many phone calls do people like make these days? Like, most people don't make that many phone calls. And so most of the phone calls that you make, the amount of time you spend writing the prompt currently, the amount of time that you would spend writing the prompt exceeds the time on the phone call.
Right.
Like I've used it for during the show, I was trying to see like, well, I need to change a flight, with Delta. And I'm like, it says you're going to be on hold for 2 hours or something. Like, that's something better. I used it at the DMV, but you have to prompt it so perfectly. Like I had a car registration problem. I sent it to talk to the DMV, like the real DMV. It did get to a human user, like it navigated the phone tree and it got to a human. And then it just made an appointment for me to go to the DMV, which is like, that's the thing I was trying to avoid.
That's the last thing I wanted.
But it did it. And it was kind of cool to listen to it do it. And the person at the other end of the line didn't know.
Okay, you saying the person on the other line didn't know. Let's talk for it because you started and we went down a different rabbit trail, but you started by saying, I wanted to know, what do we need to be aware of as this becomes a reality? And that kind of phrase, the person on the other end didn't know. If you think about the user who we should be designing for potentially as the person who's on the receiving end, what have you learned about living in a world where this is now a possibility? What should folks be aware of?
I would say for the time being, the big issue is that there's no requirement on anyone's part to disclose that AI is being used. Some places choose to do that on their own. There's obviously no law about that. There's a little bit of FCC stuff around robocalling where it's like illegal to use AI for robocalling currently. So the question is like, what happens when someone encounters AI, but they're not expecting to encounter AI? And in my experience, people find that quite upsetting for the most part. Like, they find that either irritating or almost like existential. Existential is more when you're talking to like someone In my case, I was calling up friends and family who did not know they were going to encounter AI and then suddenly realized it. And some of them found that like pretty profoundly disturbing, that they thought they were going to be talking to me. For a minute, they were thinking they were talking to me and then realized, oh no, this is something else.
And you think the latency was the biggest thing that gave it away, or what do you think is the giveaway?
Latency for them, it's more just like little subtle, differences in the way I talk. Like it's a little bit faster sometimes, like actually in its speech, like it has the latency in its time to respond, but then it would speak a little faster and it was like a little more enthusiastic than me.
Sure.
That was a common problem. Like people described it like Evan on cocaine was like my friends, that was like their shorthand for it. That it would just, I'm not necessarily like an enthusiast in that way. And then the other thing was like sense of humor. And it has, I'm not saying I have the greatest sense of humor, but it has a shit sense of humor. Like it's absolutely just, it's jokes, not jokes that not only that I would make, but like you just wouldn't make with friends. They're the jokes skimmed from, training data. And the guardrails make it just sort of like, it's just lame. So like,
So
I'm,
given those deficiencies, because to me that those seem like pretty glaring deficiencies, why, despite those deficiencies, was you said it's quite upsetting to people. So what is it that's upsetting?
I mean, I think it's upsetting to be tricked in general. Um, and when it comes to friends and family, to kind of like start speaking to someone as if, oh, hey, what's going on? And then like, even if it happened really fast over the course of 30 seconds of sort of realizing that like you feel like an idiot because you've just been talking to no one. And it's just the idea of being fooled in some cases. But then in other cases, like I had another friend who just said in the moment, just said like, I feel so lonely because fundamentally when you realize it, you realize you're just talking to yourself. Like you're just
Wow.
talking to no one.
Wow.
And then I had a more extreme example, which was a friend who didn't realize it because the way that the conversation went, he thought it was sort of me being sarcastic. And then he thought it was me being strange. And he thought I'd had like a mental breakdown. And so he was actually very upset in the moment because he was trying to figure out what he should do about it.
Did you then break cover?
I wasn't on the call. Like for 95% of these calls, I wasn't there.
Oh, you didn't even say listen in.
No. I just set it away to do its thing and it records all the calls. And so that I would pick up the recording later. There were a couple of exceptions to that, but yeah, for the most part, I then would listen to the recording and then call my friend and say like, hey, I'm okay.
And you think when we have all these, obviously audio is pretty developed now, even more so when you did it. They've started to create all these different video clones too. We hear stories of people who had transferred money because their CFO called them a Zoom call and stuff like that. What's your view on how far are we away from this definitely being used for scamming purposes, but then secondly, for use for kind of like other use?
We're so far into it being used for scamming purposes already.
Yeah.
It is the best. It might be the best technology past just like the internet and the telephone, like the best technology for scamming that has ever been created. I mean, there are already thousands upon thousands of what they call the grandparent scam, which is, they can clone a voice and then they use the voice for, a few seconds to be like, oh, I'm in trouble. They call a relative. Oh, I'm in trouble. You're going to hear now I'm going to give you my lawyer. We need money. And then like supposedly handing the phone off. That scam is now routine. Not to mention that like the normal scam architecture, they often now use AI to sort of like weed through the marks. And I know this because I have this dedicated scam line that gets like, now it gets like 40 or 50 telemarketing scam calls a day. And so they'll just use that to like, because scamming's a volume game. So like they'll use it to go through the marks. And then if they get someone who's actually engaged, then they pass them off to a human to like close the deal, basically.
Is there something about that? You said you still have a live kind of scam receiver. I remember Mark Rober did this thing with grandparents. I don't know if you saw it, but he actually, he ended up working with the FBI to shut down a call center in India that was scamming grandparents. And he was able to verify it and prove it because of his kind of YouTube channel. Do you have any altruistic or otherwise kind of mission-oriented goal with keeping this scam line alive?
Not for me. I mean, there's all these sort of scam baiters on YouTube, and there's a little bit about them in the show. And even since the show came out, actually some phone companies like O2 in UK, and I've seen a couple of others, they have implemented these bots where the bots answer the phone and pretend to be a grandma and keep the scammers on the phone. But I just think the whole premise of sort of like wasting scammers time, scamming is an industrial strength business now. These are massive, massive endeavors. And so the idea of like even keeping them on for 20 minutes and then, the FBI doesn't have trouble now like finding scams. Like there's millions of scams. The problem is like the jurisdictional issues of trying to chase, like they have to be so big to even spend the time for law enforcement to go try to track them down that it's actually like an incredibly difficult problem. And so, no, I mean, I'll say up front, like, I'm just interested in what the scammers are doing and looking for stories for myself. I don't think that my scam line does anything to like.
Do you then have we have safe words now in the family. Is that something you recommend too?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone should have that now. Everyone should have that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a safe word. It's as simple as like, if you get an emergency call from me, just also text me. Like that's all. Like that solves it. It's like a problem that if you know about it, you can avoid it for the most part. It's the same with what you described before, which is like more advanced forms of business email compromise where people are, companies get contacted and like someone pretends to be the CEO and gets them to like transfer money. And it's like, if you know about the scam, you can avoid it. That's the main defense against it.
So sorry, just to be clear, because now, as I'm recognizing my heart rate is elevated, thinking about the industrial string scamming, I want a clear kind of checklist. How do we protect ourselves? You're saying safe word.
As an individual,
Yeah.
yeah, you should have some way of identifying yourself to your family that like only you would know and someone outside wouldn't easily find out. So if you get a call from your daughter or sister, whatever, and they say, I'm in trouble and I need money from you right away for a variety of reasons, like you can say like, oh, say the word. And they could say the word. And if it's them, then obviously you need to go into action mode. But what they're trying to do is get you to go into action mode, get your adrenaline going, and not even think of making that call, making that text.
I mean, like, I find it to be quite common now that my parents get a text where it says, hey, this is Henrik. I just got a new mobile number, heads up. And then they kind of try to take it from there. Like this happened at least a few times. And I think both my parents have also been going through, scams, and some of them at one point successfully, right? And so I mean, I am 100% with you. Like I just assume that it happens and it happens over and over again. And I think, at least I can help my parents kind of not jump in the trap twice.
Yeah, it's hard though, because people, everyone's living their lives more online, but like the basic principles of if something incredibly strange happens, double check it. And also like if you buy something and it's way too good to be true in terms of price, like it probably
I wanted
is.
to go back to the beginning of the conversation, if you don't mind, because there's something you said that I thought was really interesting that I just find personally curious, and I would love to know more about it. You mentioned when we asked where this idea came from, that in the fall of 24, you were sick of hearing about AI, or fall 23, whatever it is, sick of hearing about AI. And then you ask yourself this question: is this just me being old? And I wonder about the temptation to opt out in this moment, for folks who have experience, because there's always technologies that pass us by, right? And, I think of Bryce Shalamel, who's the head of AI at Moderna. He was on our show. Amazing episode. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Evan, you should, and every listener should. But one thing Bryce said is they've made stickers at Moderna that say, don't be Fred, use AI. And that is a reference to their old CEO's boss, who, when email came out, had his assistant print his emails, and then he wrote his response, and then his name was Fred. He would hand the written response to his assistant, who would then type the response via email. And it's kind of an allusion to the fact that we always have a tendency to check out from technological changes. And when you said, is this just me being old? I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that human tendency broadly, or specifically, how do we know whether we should be checking out or leaning in? What have you learned about that?
I think it's very difficult, especially when you become, a middle-aged or older person, because it's very difficult to separate this sort of natural tendency to think that things were better when you were younger, or the way you came up, or the way your career went, from something being genuinely negative in society. And I mean, there are many examples of this over history, but the one that I use in the show is there's this article from the New York Times, which is like my favorite article that I've ever read, from 1925, or maybe it's 1924. which is an article about like a guy in New York City who has a shop, who's one of the last people to like adopt a phone in his shop. Like he has refused to have a phone in his shop. He's like the incessant ringing, and it's a beautifully written story, and it's sort of about this idea of, well, it's true that when the phone came, like it fundamentally changed people's relations with each other. And certain people were very upset about that. And people resisted it because they were like, I don't want people to be able to contact me all the time. Like, what about the quiet of the city and all these sorts of things? And now we look back at that and we're like, the phone? Like, come on. But you see it, it's happened with all of these different technologies. But then it's also a trap because some technologies are dangerous. And I think social media is a good example of like, oh, haha, the joke was on us. Like
Yeah, perhaps our
we
guard was too far down.
yeah, exactly. We
Interesting.
adopted it so easily, and we let ourselves be manipulated so thoroughly by the companies that were creating it. And they, if you look now, like they weren't really hiding their incentives. Like they were just growth, 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 growth. And the fastest way to do that was to create incentives for us to yell at each other. And so all of which is to say, I try to like I think all you can do is kind of reflect on that and think about those questions and like have those questions in your mind. And I think in this case, I do know a lot of people that are rejecting AI, writers, journalists who are just, they're very angry about it, and rightfully so. Like it is built on stolen copyrighted material, like whatever. They'll never make it to court. Probably they'll settle, but like I think in our hearts we all know what exactly happened there. But the question is like, what are we going to do about it? And what I want is because the adoption is happening so quickly, for people to try to take on some of these questions themselves and think about them, because no one is going to do it for us. And I think one of the best examples is AI therapy. Like AI therapy is happening, including voice chat is like already a huge thing. Voice doc therapy is happening. You could talk to an AI voice therapist. I had my AI talk to an AI voice therapist during the show. But like I went to look at the number of controlled studies about AI voice-based behavioral therapy and its effects. And there was one study, and like millions of people are going to be using this very soon. So it's just getting ahead of
One
where
of the
we are.
things that I've been thinking a lot about is because I was part of building the social web, and obviously we didn't think much about taking pictures of each other's food and putting on an app would kind of destroy kind of like a generation of mental health, right? It wasn't really something that we were planning at the time. And so there's all these other consequences. And one of the things that seemed clear to me now with AI is that all this loneliness that kind of like has slowly kind of crept in and got worse during COVID could potentially be even more kind of bad now that we have all these agreeable, very charming kind of synthetic people that we can chat with. And at one point, we might cut more and more real people out because it's nicer to talk to the agents that say nice things back to us all the time. And then we might kind of wake up one day and be incredibly lonely. So, I mean, that's definitely seemed to be kind of one thought. But on that note, one of the things that you spent a lot of time was talking to your agent, or at least kind of like thinking about how your agent would be a representative of you. Was there something in how AI works that you kind of got surprised about, or you learned was an important kind of discovery in taking as much of you as possible and then synthesize it down to a voice bot that then should represent you?
I mean, yeah, I learned a lot. Like I feel like it was a valuable exercise. I mean, I learned some things. I got more of a personal sense of like the way AI works. And I think as much as you read about it, and you guys know it very well, but like, a lot of people use AI and they don't really think about what it is or why it can do what it can do, that it's a predictive engine, that it's built on this training data, that it's sort of like trying to synthesize what a human would be expected to say in this particular moment when you put it into conversation. But if you listen to a lot of those conversations, and particularly if you try to have one represent you in conversation, like it becomes very clear. It's like using my voice, but speaking in this manner that sounds like the average person. It doesn't sound like me, like the content of the conversation. So it was interesting to kind of like really feel almost like how the models are working. But then the flip side of it is like in this particular type of situation where you're trying to create an agent of yourself, it's like a little bit of a trap because like it gets better the more information you give it. Like,
And and this is a super geeky question, using these rack models that you did you figure out what would be the best kind of repository of content to give it? Because I would imagine just taking your Wired articles wouldn't kind of like make it sound like you in voice. So was it more transcripts of kind of conversations, or how did you kind of like hone the tone, so to speak?
you couldn't. I felt like the knowledge base that you could give it didn't really change the tone. So I think if you wanted to do that, you'd have to sort of like train up a mini model. But I didn't. That's not what I did. I basically using the standard models, but then pasting on this knowledge base of information that it could access, which is like it's post training, so it's not really in there. It's all, I believe, I may not have the technical aspects exactly right, but like I believe it's like almost like giving it a gigantic prompt. Like if you could put all this stuff in the prompt. So I would
Yeah.
do things like write a dossier. I was sending it to therapy. So I wrote a dossier of like my whole mental health history and like what I had been to therapy for in the past and my family history and things like that. And then, that was sort of like I did learn things from listening to it, but it was unclear what to trust. It would say something and it would kind of remix my problems.
Kind of becomes like horoscopy almost.
Yeah,
That, by the
yeah.
way, was probably one of my favorite episodes. Why didn't you go through that?
Well, thanks. And listening to it, you're sort of like, well, maybe I do have that problem. Like I hear myself saying I have that
My,
problem, and
my
it sounds
elbow
right.
is hurting. Now that you mention it, my elbow is hurting. That's hysterical.
One of the things that we've been talking a little bit more about in this podcast is how much we learn about humanity using this technology and how much we learn about ourselves when we use it. And one thing that we talked to the CEO at Lansing about, which blew my mind, was kind of this idea of what are skills that we need to train as humans to become better of using AI. So if we assume that basically you put garbage in, you get garbage out, you put unique original thought into it, it kind of amplified and you become even better. I think the way that Jeremy put in that podcast was, if this is an Iron Man suit and you can lift 200 pounds, then you might be able to push 1,000 with AI. But if you can only lift 25 pounds, then you can only kind of lift 200 pounds. So it's like you become exponential better by understanding your own uniqueness in humanity. Was there something as you were doing this that made you think, you know what, as a human, I need to become better of doing this, either just becoming a better human, but maybe even like to become a better human, to be better using this technology?
I mean, to become just a better human, the main thing that it kept highlighting for me is sort of like small talk. Like I'm terrible at small talk. And I mean, the AI is worse than me at small talk. It's like, it's so boring and it's just painfully bad because again, it's like, not only is the small talk, it's trying to find like the most small talk that you could small talk,
The
and it's,
smallest small talk
yeah.
possible.
But of course, it sounded like me. So I'm listening to it saying like, man, that's what I sound like. Like, that's what I sound like on the playground with like parents of other kids when I'm trying to make small talk. And I got to do better. Like, I got to be better than this thing. So it did have that self-improvement aspect.
It was a negative. That's just, well, okay. So we've been talking about audio mostly. Can you talk for a second about your own, call it personal productivity tech stack? Like, how are you using Gen AI more broadly in your work beyond your explorations with audio?
Well, this is the crazy thing with me, which is that the answer to that is not at all. Like, practically zero. I mean, I'll give you a couple examples of how I do use it because obviously it's useful. But part of my whole thing is like, I like my job, and I spent my whole career trying to like orient around what I want to do and the way I want to do it. And I'm not really I'm sort of surprised at all the people that are like looking for efficiencies all the time. Like I'm not trying to not answer my email and let an AI answer my email. Like maybe I don't get as much email as I did when I was like running a company and being an editor and like So I understand being overwhelmed, but I just like, I've been working on my life myself for many years, and I'm not really looking for like a digital assistant to solve problems. Like I like solving the problems, and or like writing. I like writing. I mean, it's hard sometimes, but like that's what I signed up for. If I wanted to not write, I would have done some other job that was paid better than writing. So my that's kind of my attitude towards it. Like I'm not anti AI, and what I'll see these places where it can be used, like vacation planning and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, cool, yeah, I'll use it for that. But in terms of my work, I'm a little bit, and it's a little bit of a pushback on like the constant sort of like uh tuning up of everyone's life. I just don't believe everyone's lives are like needing these like dials to be tuned all the time. Like people should just relax a little bit and like have some dead time. Enjoy, like I don't know. It's just a little bit of a personal belief. But that said, for things like reporting, for instance, I use like Notebook LM, the Google one, to like put in a ton of court documents for a story that I'm working on, and then be able to query those court documents and try to find connections. And it's not like a miracle machine. Like it's not finding incredible stuff that I would never find, but it's just like time wise, like, yeah, I can find a lot of stuff in those documents that otherwise would require many hours of my work.
And so just to dig into that workflow for a second, you're saying if you're reporting on a story, you take a bunch of kind of relevant documentation, you upload it to Notebook LM, you create a new notebook, and then how do you query it to identify connections? Like what's a recent kind of epiphany moment that you feel like might have been accelerated by Notebook LM?
Well, for example, oftentimes, like I'm doing a story right now where there are probably 5 different cases. They're federal court cases. Each of them has a ton of documents. And then in those documents, there are redacted company names. So there's companies that are described as like a staffing company from Texas. But the US attorneys are not always consistent across. They're not like sitting down in a room and trying to make sure no one could find out. They're just like, okay, give like redact this and give it a name. So if you actually like compare all of the different ones, you can often suss out which ones they are. Now, I didn't find that Notebook LM could itself suss them out that well. Like it didn't say like, oh, that's, DuPont. That's the company. But what it could do is give me lists. I would be like, give me a list of every company that's described and their descriptions. And it would just be like, brr. And I'd be like, okay, give me 10 that are described, seem like they're described 2 different ways. Brr. Like you could just get all these lists. Now that would take me, I would have to go through,
Pretty
hundreds and hundreds of
painstaking,
pages.
yeah.
Yes, which I have done in the past, but it's just like, it does speed up that process. So even I am looking for efficiencies, the person who rejects constantly looking for efficiencies.
I think it's great. I mean, to me, it illustrates something of the tension, which is there are areas of our lives where we do want efficiency, and there are areas where we don't. And I think what your kind of first set of comments was geared towards is acknowledging a really important point, which is we don't want everything to be faster. There's some stuff we actually like to do because we like to do it. And the fact that it's hard doesn't mean it should be made easier. Maybe it being hard is the point. Like, for example, exercise. You actually don't want exercise to be easier. If you do, you're no longer building muscle, right? So that's like the extreme example. But then to say that I don't want to be efficient ever is also, you go, that's not totally true. I mean, I don't really love reading through these hundreds of pages of Word documents. And I think, maybe encouraging our audience too to be a little bit thorough in assessing their workflows to say, what's the stuff that sucks? Our friend Nicholas has this phrase, it sucks that, right? What's the stuff that sucks? You go, I'm not deriving value from that being difficult. And then what's the stuff that is hard, but it being hard is the point, right? And then perhaps you put up harder confines as it sounds like you have, Evan, and you say, that's an area where I don't want assistance, not because it couldn't help, but because I actually enjoy doing it myself.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that's very thoughtful, and also like it's it was exaggerated for me to say I don't seek any efficiencies. I will say that it's very difficult to identify the things that suck that are somehow like not meaningful. Like for example, I think one of the areas where they're going to try to use this voice AI is to replace, you know, clerks like they're using in fast food restaurants. And you're like, well, who cares? Like what is the 30 seconds that I collect my order from someone at a fast food restaurant? Like, if that was a robot, like, fine, I'm just trying to get my food. And maybe that job, well, it's not a great job anyway. But I feel like that's life, though. Like, you can't eliminate those interactions from life. And I think if you start down the road of just treating every inconvenience as something to be solved with technology, again, like, technology solves a lot of inconveniences, but like, you end up with this like smooth life that is also in a weird way meaningless. Like, you can't spend your whole life having I mean, very wealthy people can do this, but like everyone else has to deal with shit all the time. And like, you
One
can't
thing
get rid
that
of it.
I'm I'm actually, you heard earlier, I'm very kind of like in line, in tune with kind of like that problem statement, right? But one thing I kind of been pondering a bit about on this specific matter is you had auto tune that kind of came online, and then for music, and then everybody's like, "Oh, that's auto tune," and you know, Milli Vanilli kind of got like, you know, no, that was not even auto tune, that's somebody else's singer, but nonetheless, like, but then suddenly auto tune became kind of like the thing, and now music sounds auto tuney in order to be real. Then you had filters on Instagram. It was like hashtag no filters, bad to filters. Now, of course, everybody just almost optimized for filters. And then you had, I mean, then like fashion, like you had fake lips and boobs and stuff like that. And then now to the point that that's almost like what you would like. It needs to be so fake looking that you can see, right? And so maybe back to you being old, and we're both born the same year, so I can say that. Uh, I wonder if that is just a little bit of the romantic feeling, because if you look at all these other things, like the thickness, the clerk that takes your order, or even the synthetic version of Evan that somebody can call and talk to now, like if you look at these other things, it might turn the same way. That it's not just like you don't want it, but that is the thing you want because it's a little bit Max Head-dromy. I guess like there's not a question. It was more kind of like a philosophical kind of like
No,
playback.
I think that's right. I mean, that is the biggest place where this sort of like, are you old or are you seeing something negative about technology question comes in, is like taste around art or music or anything else. And I'm very skeptical of my own perspective on any of that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, if people want to listen to AI music, I mean, yes, of course, my reaction is like, I listen to music because a human made it. But I listen to a lot of electronic music too. So, they use tools to make those things. So yeah, I completely agree with you in that area. I think what really like gets in my craw is around, it's this sort of like tech industry hyper efficiency around AI changing our habits and allowing us to do stuff. And it's like, that's all fine if it's what you're doing is meaningful. If you're really truly doing something very meaningful and you're freeing up more time to do the meaningful thing, but I'm not convinced that that's what people are doing.
It's a whole, we should make a baby in 4 months with 2 women, that's kind of stuff here.
That's funny. Yeah, split the labor. Well, I do think, Evan, I mean, just it's not a counterpoint necessarily, but one just data point, which is kind of interesting. We interviewed John Waldman, who's the CEO of a company called Homebase, which serves hundreds of thousands of small businesses, coffee shops, record stores, things like that. And one of the things he mentioned was leveraging AI-powered prototyping tools specifically has resulted in his team spending a ton more time in the field with customers. He said that the design team and the development team, product team used to spend a ton of time at the office building kind of PRD documents, which are kind of standard for product development. And he said now, instead of a 20-page PRD doc, which somebody's got to write and then somebody's got to read to be kind of a good citizen, now we're building prototypes in natural language. And we go, what do we do with all those hours that we spent, writing and reading documents? We're redeploying them to be with our customers, right? Which to me is a really spectacular, kind of the best thing you could hope for. Or I don't want to say best, but at least in that context, of course you should be spending more time with your customers. Of course you should be trying more things. So I think that it's not straightforward, and there's kind of dangers on both sides. But I do think even when it comes to inconvenience, is a really interesting, you had said a second ago, is every inconvenience kind of to be solved. And, as a professor of innovation and creativity, one of the best ways you can teach a young person or, an older person for that matter, to come up with novel ideas is to tell them to keep a bug list. It's an assignment we've been giving at Stanford since the 1960s, which is not errors in lines of code. This is long before computer programming entered common parlance. It's just write down a list of things that bug you. Because it turns out that someone who's attentive to problems becomes capable of solutions, right? And so, and in Jerry Seinfeld, I know he's got a great bit about how, that's why you have to have kids, because then you always have material, because your life is so annoying, but there's something about attention to annoyances and kind of the human drive to eliminate them that, while I agree we can't kind of have a friction-free experience, and also what we observe from the kind of hyper elite is a friction-free life isn't really necessarily to be desired, granted, on the one hand. Yet on the other hand, I would say to people, if you want to innovate, look at inconveniences, look at stuff that's irritating, right? Chances are there's an opportunity there. So again, another case of it's not a straightforward conclusion that we can draw from some of these, just recognizing there are trade-offs and there's kind of dangers on both sides of the equation. But I think if I really like what you said earlier, putting these questions in people's minds and prompting them to consider the following, I think will really do a lot to help usher in a mindfulness and an awareness of the kind of future that we want to be building towards, rather than just getting kind of derailed or blindsided by a future that we really didn't want.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not opposed to human improvement for sure. Like, or technology in any sense. I just think there's a strong incentive for companies to be selling us convenience improvements, and they've been doing that. And as has been discussed earlier, like, people don't seem happier. Like, people seem lonelier. So I feel like the improvements need to be on some more systematic level than what startups are kind of creating for us in the moment. At the same time, like, I'm not opposed to any sort of like attempt to advance, the human condition. So when people are doing that, I think it's a great example, something that causes people to like return to in-person communication, like a technology that frees up time for people to return to in-person communication. I agree with you. That is our best case scenario. Like that,
Right.
We want more of that. Whoever's making that, I want more of it.
John Waldman, we approve of your work.
On that note, I think we're out of time. I thought it was super interesting. And I'm really, really happy that you made the 6-episode show, because I very much enjoyed it.
We'll definitely link to it in the show notes.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeremy, I am a very big fan of his show, The Shell Game. And so it was fun to get him on and be able to ask a few more questions. What stood out to you?
I love someone who takes action in some way in order to learn. So that to me is just I don't know if it's a journalistic impulse or what, but I really commend his instinct that, well, I'm kind of tired of hearing about this. Maybe I should get in the game, and then finding a unique angle. I haven't listened to the show, but I'm super interested to check it out now. That's kind of one thing. The other thing that I found kind of shocking and surprising is, I'm sure you did as well, is how little it sounds like he uses AI kind of in the broader context of his workflow. And I thought, I mean, we obviously don't have to rehash what we got into there, but in the conversation, but I thought it was pretty interesting to think about the tension between things that we want to be made more efficient and things that we don't, and also how hard it is to know the difference. I think that we may kind of value the hard work of something, but then boy, howdy, it sure is nice when it's not hard work. And if we aren't kind of thoughtful and maybe experimental to test what parts of my work are hard that should be hard, and what parts of my work are hard that shouldn't be, we may actually have the wrong instinct about some of that stuff. So those are some of the thoughts that I kind of left thinking. What about you?
I mean, like, definitely that everybody should have a safe word. It seems like such an obvious thing. It doesn't take too long time. It's a little bit like, I guess it's in the prepper kind of like world, but,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
it might be, you never have to use it, but it also seemed to be very easy just to agree. I mean, a lot of people have like a code word for their alarm. So like if suddenly the alarm goes off, they call the security company and saying, here's my password. It just seemed to be proven that everybody should have that. I just thought it's really interesting. And as you know, I've been a little bit on this kick on like what is uniquely human as we race towards AGI and like these machines that can be kind of as good as the smartest PhDs. What is it that they won't be very good at? And it's kind of interesting that one of those things is kind of small talk, because it's kind of complicated.
Yeah, the fact that it's really difficult to make kind of casual jokes that are contextual, I think it's an understandable weak point of AI, but it's a pretty interesting one to realize it's such a prosaic, natural part of human language, and yet perhaps is it underrepresented in the training data? I don't know if there's a lot of small talk in training data as a
It's probably not.
hypothesis. I don't know. That's interesting.
And then, like, is a little bit along the same lines. Like you and I speak a lot about like what is that we can optimize with AI. And we also talked, recently about a lot of the things that like what could be some of the downsides of AI that might not be crystal clear. And so I think adding that little question of like, I can automate this, but should I?
Never.
Is actually, I think, an interesting kind of little question to ask yourself over the next few months as we kind of like just do more and more with AI. Like, is this something that I do because I do this? Like, if I realize a lot of people doing performance reviews for their staff through this, but like the birthday note, should that be written by AI, or should you just maybe do that yourself because it kind of trains you to be an innate human or whatever? Then I don't know. I thought that was an interesting kind of thing just to ponder a little bit about.
Yeah. Yeah. The question of what is worth your time, like as an example, he mentioned how he uses Notebook LM to parse court documents and stuff. And I wonder, there's a question of what is the line you're going to write in the article that could be fed or informed or accelerated by AI. But then there's almost like the human accomplishment piece. Like I can imagine there's something very gratifying about reading those documents and then making the connection and going, it's DuPont or, whatever it is, right? That all of a sudden, yeah, granted, he just saved himself a bunch of time. Perhaps he also lost that kind of the reward that comes from sleuthing and sifting. And it is an interesting question going back again, just kind of we're revisiting this
And
question of like, what's the hard that's worth doing?
another example, I saw a lot of people online taking drawings from their kids and then putting into ChatGPT and make it like get it to come to life, make it look professional. And then I was going, yeah, it looks 3D and nice now, but like that's not really the point, right?
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
point is not that it looked like a finished, kind of complete piece of work. So anyway,
I think signposting, just previous episodes, shout out to Bryce Shalamel, who talked, we mentioned, Don't Be Fred, the head of AI at Moderna. That's one. Another one, Josh, too, in our conversation about Orion and augmentation. And then also to your point about augmentation and identifying opportunities, Josh Wool, we talked to about the practice of identifying and then implementing. And perhaps, Henrik, you're adding a layer to that conversation, which is assessing whether you actually want to automate it or whether it should continue to be a human-only activity. Anyway, lots of interesting stuff there. But thanks as always for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like it, share it, send it to a friend. And what's our safe word for this episode, Henrik?
oh, what's the safe word?
It could be safe word. Would that be meta? What's your safe word?
Yeah,
Safe word?
let's do safe word. Awesome, man. Have a good one.
You too.